The list view control is another way that you can display lists of data. So you could add it to the category of the list box, grids, etc. We're going to talk about the list view here. The list view derives from the list box, and so when you want to get data into it, you set the item source property of the list view to a collection of data. So what's the difference between the list view and the list box? The primary difference is that the list view has views. And a view defines how you want to display and organize data. So to select a view, you set the view property of the list view to your view. And the nice thing about the list view is that you have the ability to use more than one view. So with a list box, there's a particular view. The list box has a built-in view. With the list view, you can select your view. So that's the good news. The bad news is that currently the only view that ships with WPF is the grid view, although you could create your own custom views. So the grid view displays items in columns with headers. So it basically displays items in a grid. You can define the columns in XAML. You can also, at design time, use the Collection Editor Columns dialog box. By default, the columns automatically size themselves to display their content. If you want more control over that, you can set the width property of each column. And then for each column, you can set its display member binding property to specify what data to display. So here's some XAML that sets up a list view and a grid view. We start off with a list view called Customers List View. Item source is set to binding, and in this example we'd actually set the item source in code. Then we specify the view, and in there we specify that we want to use a grid view. Then we define columns, and the first column has a header of customer, width of 200, and it's going to be bound to the company name column. And then we would continue to define each of the additional columns. There are a couple interesting properties of the list view. The selection mode property determines whether users can select one or more than one item from the list. There's three possible values: extended, multiple, and single. So if it's set to single, users can select only one item at a time. If it's set to multiple, you can select multiple items, although you have to click them one at a time. And if selection mode is set to extended, you can select multiple items at a time. You can select contiguous items by clicking one, holding down the Shift key, clicking another, etc. The default is extended, and we'll see these in the demo. And then the selected items property contains the collection of the one or more items you selected. So let's go take a look at the list view. I have the list view demo sample project open. And I have the simple list view 1 window open right now. And it has a simple list view that's going to display customer information. So I can add a list view to a window by dragging one from the toolbox. And it would be down here in the WPF controls. Scroll down, here's a list view. I can drag this on. I can also, of course, create this in XAML. So here's the XAML that defines this list view. It's called Customers List View. The item source is set to binding because I'm going to set that in code. Then I specify the view, and I specify that I want a grid view. And then I can define the columns. Here I'm defining the columns in XAML. This will have 4 columns. Actually, that's 5 columns. Company name, contact title, country, and then the number of orders. And that's orders.count because I am using link to SQL here. So here's my object model. I have customers. Where are customers? There they are. There's customers all the way down here. Customers. And so customers is related to orders, and so I can just read the order count. So in my binding, for the orders column, I'm binding this to orders.count. Customers have an orders property. That orders property is a collection of orders I just count. So I can define my grid view columns in XAML. I can also define them in the properties window. So if I select the list view and come into properties, Then here are the properties of the list view. The first thing I'll do is set the view. The only view that ships in WPF right now is the grid view, so that's set to grid view. I could create a custom view, but I'll just use a grid view here. And then if I select the grid view, which I can do in the document outline, come down and select the grid view. Then if I come over to the properties, if I select the grid view, there we are, then come into the properties, click the ellipsis next to columns, and here's the collection editor columns dialog box. And I can add new grid view columns here or configure the existing one. So if I wanted to change a header or a width, I could do it in the XAML. I can also do it in this dialog box. Okay, let's go back and look at the XAML. Again, I've defined all my columns as grid view columns, and when I run this, we're going to retrieve customers and populate the list view. So let's run this example. It's simple list view 1, and when the window appears, here's the list view showing all of the customers in a grid. We see the customer, the contact, the title, the country, and the number of orders for all 91 customers in the Northwind database. And so in terms of code, all we did when the window loaded is we created a new instance of the Northwind data context. When you use LINQ to SQL, your data context is the runtime representation. When you use LINQ to SQL, your data context is responsible for communicating with the database. And so we do a simple LINQ query from cust in customer, select cust, so bring me back all of the customers, and set the item source property of the list view to that. And then we know to display only the certain columns because I configured the list view to display these 5 columns. Now let's look at the selection mode. The selection mode determines whether or not I can select more than one customer at a time. The default is extended. When this is set to extended, I can select multiple customers. I can hold down the control key and select a number of customers. I can click one, hold down the shift key and select more. I can also move to another one, hold down the control key. Actually, I still have the shift key down. I can come here and hold down the control key and select another one, and then if I hold down the shift control key, I can select multiple contiguous groups of customers. And then when I click select, I'm going to display all of the customers that I selected. And so when I click select, which is down here, I'm just going to loop through the selected items. If it's 0, I display no customers selected. If it's not, then I loop through the selected customers and display the company name. And each of the items in here is an instance of the customer class, so I can just call company name. Now if I set this to multiple, then all I need to do is set the selection mode property to multiple here. And now every time I click on a customer, if it's not selected, it becomes selected. If it is selected, it becomes unselected. I can't select multiple contiguous customers, so if I click bottom dollar markets, hold down the shift key, and select Chop Suey Chinese, I'm not selecting everything in between. Holding down the shift key in this case doesn't really do anything. Selection mode of multiple is basically a toggle for each individual customer. And then I can also set this to single, and that says I can only select one at a time. So this example displays some of the information for customers. It's a fairly easy way of putting together this nice list of customers. But what if I want to see the rest of the information? I'm going to do that in the simple list view 2 example. Let's narrow this down a little bit. There. So now my grid view displays just the customer, city, and country, and then each time I select one, I see the rest of the information below. Let's go take a look at the XAML for this. The list view itself, pretty straightforward. Again, 3 columns, company name, city, customer. And then the grid is bound to the selected item in the list view. And that selected item is an instance of the customer class, so then each of the text boxes can just be bound to a property of the customer class. And in terms of the code, very simple. Just bring down all of the customers and set the item source property of the list view to customers. And then display these 3 columns in the list view, and then the additional information is already retrieved, and I can just display it. And of course, if I had an issue with bringing down all of the customers all at once, I mean, we're doing a select star from customers here. If I didn't want to do that, then each time I selected a customer, I could, in the selection changed event, query the data source and bring back the information for that customer. The list views we just saw were pretty simple, but also pretty unattractive. No surprise, we can apply styles to them and make them look better. And you can apply styles to both the items and the headers. You can use the header content style property of an individual column and specify what style the column's headers should use. You can also control the text that appears by using the header template property of the column and specify what template the column header should use to display its content. And then you can use the item container style property of the list view to specify the style that each item should use. So you can style the headers, you can also style the items. Let's see how to do that and make better looking list views. Here's the Style a List View window. And this window contains a list view that will display customer, city, and country, and then additional information in the text boxes below. But the list view is styled to make it a little more attractive. Let's run this first and see what it looks like, and then we'll see how that was accomplished. So here's the example, and it's a little better looking than the ones we saw previously. The headers have a background color, the font's a little bit bigger, and then the items in the list view have alternating colors. This is all done in XAML, so let's go look at the XAML. The list view has its item container style property set to the My Item Style resource, which is up in the Window Resources section. Here's My Item Style. The target type is list view item, and this specifies that the background property for each item should be based on the results of running this background converter. And the background converter is the grid view row background converter class, which is this code here. It inherits from iValueConverter. The first argument that comes in is the actual object, and that's a list view item, so we cast value to list view item, and then we want to get the list view that this list view item belongs to. So we can use items control from item container, pass in the list view item. That comes back as a list view, so now this list view field is the actual list view. And then we just want to find out which item we're on, because we want to set even numbered items, we want their background to be light blue, and odd numbered items, their background should be beige. So the converter returns either light blue or beige for the background, and that's how we get alternating colors for each item in the list view. Now for the headers, we come down and look at the XAML here. For each grid view column, we specify the header container style is My Header Style, and the header template should be My Header Template. Let's look at the container style first. That's the style My Header Style. Target type is grid view column header, and we simply say the background should be tan. So the background for each column is tan. That's set at the individual column. I haven't quite found yet how to set it for each column once, so I had to set it for each individual column. I guess the good news is that you could have different colors for each column. Here I just wanted tan for all of them, so I just set the header container style for each column. Then for the actual content, I set the header template to use the myHeaderTemplate style, and the myHeaderTemplate style just says for the text that you're displaying, use the font size of 12 and display these as bold. So the actual text appears in 12-point bold. So we style the individual list view items and we style the individual column headers. Now you can do some interesting things with the column headers. Here I've done something simple. I just said the background was tan and then display the headers in 12-point bold. But you could add graphics in here. There's a lot of stuff that you could do. There's a lot of stuff that you could do using styles beyond just the simple stuff we've done here. It turns out in the list view that the column headers are buttons. So what you can do is you can add code to the click event of a header, and then in that code you could sort the column. So the list view doesn't have built-in sorting automatically. You can't click the header and have it sort automatically. You write code for that. And in your code you're going to use the sort descriptions property of your collection view, which contains a collection of sort description structures, and then each of those sort description structures specifies the column that you want to sort on and the order. So in your code you can add a sorting order by calling the add method of sort descriptions and add a new sort description object specifying column and order, and you can also clear the sort descriptions, which will clear the sorting. You can also change the order of columns by default by dragging them. So similarly to the way that you would move columns in Excel. If you want to turn this off, you could set the allows column reorder property of the grid view to false. So let's go take a look at sorting and reordering in list views. Here's the sorting and reordering window, and what we're going to do in this list view is, as the name implies, sort and reorder. Let's run it and see what it does, and then we'll take a look at how we accomplish it. The column headers are actually buttons, and I've added a tooltip here that tells you can click on a column to sort by it. So if I click city, I can now sort these by city. Ascending or descending, I can do country, ascending or descending, and then of course customer, ascending or descending. And then by default, I can reorder these. I can drag this over here, I could drag this over here, I can reorder these to my heart's content. Unless I want to prohibit that, in which case now you can see that I can't drag these. Okay, let's see how this works. Let's look at the XAML first. In the list view, I'm handling the click property of the grid view column header. And so let's go take a look at that code. So in this event handler, the field E, an instance of routed event args, I can use the original source property of that to find out what exactly was clicked. The same event's going to run for all three columns. So I get the grid view column header, and so this header clicked is the column I clicked. Set up this direction field as an instance of list sort direction. And then if header clicked is not null, then the first thing I need to do is find out what the role of this header is. If the role is not padding, then I want to do something. Well, what is this padding? Well, it turns out that the runtime adds this column here. So I could click on that, but that's not really a column. So this is the padding. So the first thing I want to do is make sure that the user clicked on a column that actually has information in it. So that's what this line of code right here is doing. So if the role of the header I clicked is not padding, then I'm going to run some code. So if the user has not clicked on the same header they clicked on before, then I'll set the direction to ascending. Otherwise, I'm going to choose the opposite. If the column was sorted in ascending order, I'm going to sort it in descending order. If it was in descending order, I'm now going to sort it in ascending order. Then I want to get the header, so I want to know what column was selected. So I'm going to read the header property and then call this sort method, passing in the actual header and the direction. Now sorting is done in a view, so I'm going to get the default view for the collection of customers, and then I'm going to clear out the sort descriptions, and if the user clicked the customer column, then I need to set this sort by the company name because the actual property in the customer class is not called customer, it's called company name. So if I tried to sort by customer, then an exception would be thrown because there is no customer property in there. I don't have to do that for the other two columns because the property names are city and country. So then I create a new sort description, the name of the column or the property to sort on, and the direction. Add that to the collection of sort descriptions and refresh the data view. And the data view is the view, the underlying view for this list view. So then when I click this, let's actually set a breakpoint here and run this. So now when I click this, the original source is the grid view column I clicked, and I can see here that it's country. Then we set the list sort direction, start off at 0. If header clicked is not null, I did click a header. Is the column I clicked the padding column? No, it's not. Is the header I clicked the same as the last header clicked? So originally it was customer, now it's country. So therefore I'm going to set the direction to ascending. I want to get the text, which is country, and then I'm going to go into the sort method passing country and ascending. So let's step into that. Get a reference to the underlying view, clear out the sort descriptions, and then add a new sort description saying sort by country in, there it is, ascending. And that now has sorted by country. And if I click right here, I've clicked a column header, so what I'm going to do is check to see if the role is padding, which it is, and therefore I'm not going to do anything. By default, I can reorder columns, drag and drop them to a different location. If I want to prohibit that, then I'm going to uncheck Allow Reorder. So if we go back to this checkbox, I'm handling the checked and the unchecked events. And then, where is it? Here it is. If this is checked, then I turn allows column reorder to true. If it's unchecked, I set it to false. So now that it's unchecked, I'm not allowed to drag and drop. If it is, then I can rearrange these. There we go. You saw earlier that you can use a data template to control the text that appears in column headers. So we saw an example of displaying the text in the column header in 12-point bold. You can also use a data template to control the items themselves. And the way you do that is by using the cell template property of the grid view column. And that cell template property specifies the template that you want to use to display the contents of a particular column cell. So let's go see how to use the cell template property to control how items appear in the list view. Here's the Use a Cell Template window, and I'm going to display employee information in the list view and then additional information in these text boxes below. So let's run this. Here's what the window looks like. For the employees, I want to display last name, comma, first name in a larger font, then the hire date, and then these notes, and I want the notes to wrap so they fit inside the window. Let's go take a look at the XAML, see how we did this. Nothing particular going on at the list view. It's all done at the column level. So for the employee column, I'm specifying that I want to use a cell template, and the particular cell template I want to use is employee name template. And that's defined up here in the window resources section. It's actually a data template called employee name template, and the data template says use 3 text blocks. The first one is bound to last name, 14-point bold, then display a comma, then display the first name, and all of those are in 14-point bold. And that's why employee name shows up like this. Now the hire date, pretty straightforward, just show the hire date using the little d format. So it's just month, day, year with no time. And then for the notes, I also want to use a data template, but notice there's 2 ways I can set the cell template. The first is I can reference a cell template that's defined somewhere else, and that's a great thing to do if you're sharing a template across either multiple controls or multiple windows. I can also define it in line, which I'm doing here. So for the notes grid view column, I say grid view column.cell template, then I have the data template and I define it right here. So it's a text block displaying the notes, and I've set the text wrapping to wrap and the horizontal alignment to center so that the notes are centered in here and they wrap. So I'm using the cell template to display last name, comma, first name in 14-point bold, and to wrap the notes and center them in the column. And again, I do that by using the cell template property of the grid view column, either referencing a data template that's defined somewhere else or defining it in line. Drag and drop data binding has been in Windows Forms since Visual Studio 2005. It's now supported in WPF. When you drag data from the Data Sources window onto a window, Visual Studio creates a collection view source in XAML, and that's a representation of the collections view. So you can create list views on your windows by using drag and drop data binding, and all you need to do is specify when you drag an object from the Data Sources window that you want to create a list view. So let's see how to do that. I've got the drag and drop data binding demo project open. And this project will have 2 windows, one that shows using drag and drop data binding with a list view, and the other that shows using drag and drop data binding with a data grid. We're going to look at the list view example here. We're using link to SQL, so our object model has customers, products, categories, suppliers, orders, order details, the usual stuff. And what we want to do is create on the list view example window a UI that shows us categories and products. And what I want to do on the list view example window is use drag and drop data binding and create a UI that displays categories and products. So the first thing I'm going to need is a data source. I can go into my data sources window and add a new data source. And if I was talking directly to the SQL Server database, I'd base this on database, but because I'm using link to SQL and I have a data object model, I'm going to select object. Then I'll click next. Then I'm going to expand drag and drop data binding demo twice. and I'm going to select category, product, and supplier, and then click Finish. And those three entities show up in the Data Sources window. So now what I want to do is create list views based on categories. By default, when I drag and drop this onto the window, Visual Studio will create a data grid. If I want to create a list view, then I select List from here. And so I'm going to drag this onto the window, and Visual Studio will create a list view. So I'm just going to get a little bit more room here. So we see that Visual Studio created a list view, named category list view, and it also then created a grid view with the information from the categories table, ID, name, description. And Visual Studio also created a collection view source, named category view source based on category. And then if we look at the code, Visual Studio added this code to essentially populate the category view source, to get a reference to the category view source. So category view source is defined in XAML right here, and we can work with it in code by using this .find resource. So now what we want to do is write code to retrieve data and populate the view source, the category view source. And I have a snippet for that. ADC01. There it is. So just do a simple query, create a new instance of the data context, and bring down the category information. And then set the source property of category view source equal to the collection of categories. And at that point, the list view would be populated and would display the information. So before we do that, let's just widen this. Let's adjust the list view a little bit. So I'm going to widen it to fill out the window. Then I'm going to widen these columns and have control over the headers. And I can do that in XAML, but I can also do that visually using the dialog boxes. So what I'm going to do is go back to the designer, and I want to select the actual grid view. I can use the document outline and select grid view, then go into the properties window and click the ellipsis next to columns, and here are my three columns. One for category ID, one for category name, one for description. So I want to set the width of the category name to 150, and the width of the description I want equal to 400, and I'll leave the width of the category ID alone at 80. And I could also change the headers if I wanted to. I could make this header ID, make this category, and leave this as description. And then if I click OK, come back into the XAML, and I can see that those changes were made here. Sometimes you'll find it easier to make those changes in the XAML. Sometimes you'll find it easier to use the properties window. I just wanted to show that you could use the properties window to do that. Okay, now if I save this and build it and then run it, when the window loads, we're going to retrieve category information and display that in the list view. There we go. So there's our list view showing category information. And if I click in each of these, notice that I can actually select this. The grid view uses text boxes to display this information. I could actually type over this. I don't have any code to save changes in here, so nothing will happen. But by default, I can start typing away. Now categories have products, so what I want to do is display the products for a particular category when I select that category. So let's go back into the design view, come back into the data sources window, and here are the related products for each category. And so I'm going to drag and drop that onto this window, but first I'm going to specify that I want a list view for that as well. Drag products onto here. and then fill out the remainder of the window. Now if we look at the XAML that Visual Studio added, here's the second list view for products, and it's using the category products view source. And the category products view source is defined up here. There we go. There. And this is based on products, and it is essentially the products property of the selected category. And so it will display the related products for that category. So now I can run this. And the top list view displays categories, the bottom list view displays the products for the selected category. So to select a category, I click over here. Notice that clicking in the text box does not select it. But if I click over here and actually select a different category, I'll see the products in that category. And then what I could certainly do is, in the XAML, display maybe less of the information, widen these columns, same way I did before. But basically, I can use drag and drop data binding to put together this one-to-many window that displays parent items in the top list view and child items in the bottom list view. The last thing we want to look at with list views is grouping. So how do we group items in a list view? And we can use the collection view's group descriptions property. And group descriptions is a collection of group description objects that describes how items are grouped. So in this sense, it's similar to the sorting, where we use the sort descriptions property, and then that was made up of sort description objects. Similarly for grouping, there's a group descriptions property made up of group description objects. And we'll see how you can style the group headers and make them look a little bit better and also add some functionality. Group descriptions is a property of the view source. We'll see in the XAML that we define that at the collection view source level. So here we're saying group customers by country. Let's go see this in code. Here's the grouping window, and in this window we have a list view that will display customers grouped by country. Let's run this, see what it does first, and then we'll see how it was put together. So we can see that we're listing each country, and within each country, customers are listed by city first and then by company name. And in each of these groups, we're displaying the country and the number of customers in it, and then each country is an expandable or collapsible region. So to collapse, I click on the up arrow. To expand, I click on the down arrow. Let's go into the XAML and see how this was done. I'm using a collection view source. It's called customer view source. It's based on customer. And then in here, I define the group order. So I have a collection view source.group descriptions, and within that, property group description, and the property name is country, and that says group by country. Now in order to group by country, I need the data to be ordered by country in the first place. So in my query, I made sure to order by country and then by city and company name. I have to order by country because you can't group data that's not ordered in the same fashion. So if this wasn't ordered by country and I tried to group by country, an exception would be thrown. I ordered by city and company name so that by default we'd have the cities in alphabetical order, and then within each city the companies in alphabetical order. So the actual grouping is pretty straightforward. Just order by country and then specify at the collection view source level that I want to group by country. Next thing we want to look at is the styling of the group. How did I get it so that there's this background? How did I get it to display the number of companies in each country? And where did I display to use this expandable collapsible region? So that's all done in a group style. group style dot container style, the target type of group item. And then I said that for everything in the list view, use an expander. And the expander consists of two things, a header and a collapsible region. So in the expander control, this is the header, and then the content is in the collapsible region. So this list view now actually contains a list of expanders. And for the expander header, I said the background should be tan. Display the name, meaning the name of whatever you're grouping on, which is the name of the country, and then the item count as well. And that's why the expander header shows me the country and the number of customers in that country. And then for the actual content of the expander, I just said use whatever the list view does. So this items presenter says show the same items the list view would show. So just to review the group, I specify the group description at the collection view source level, and then I can style the group to use the expander and show me the country, the number of customers, and then if I want to see the customers or not see them, I can collapse or expand the region.